was nearly 20 years ago that I met Ambassador Kawar. Back in 1983, a group of students at Boston College had established a student organization called the Middle East Club, for which I served as the faculty advisor. The club at the time included 10 or 12 students from various backgrounds, some Middle Easterners and some not. And I believe the president was at the time a student by the name of Brad Smith. So we plodded along, and then appeared on the scene this incredibly energetic, charismatic, hardworking, obviously destined to be a leader, who wrested the functions of the club from our hands and established and promoted an organization which was really the envy on the campus of a very, very active and an interesting club to be a member of. That young man, of course, is our distinguished speaker for this evening, Ambassador Karim Kawar. But let me just to give you a sense of what he was able to accomplish in the course of a very short period of time, about 2 years. The club, of course, had an organizational chart, and all the various functions were clearly laid out. It sponsored a variety of functions, speeches, guests to the campus, night outings, evening outings, and so on and so forth. They also published a newsletter, I'm holding a copy of it, called the MEC Bulletin, in which Ambassador Kawar, that time Karim Kawar, had a regular column. And just to give you a sense of his and his fellow club members' visions, in this issue, which was volume 2, number 1, there are such articles as the oil crisis, some party that was, then the Middle East over the years, a traveler's corner, an article on Saudi Arabia then and now, an article on Middle Eastern culture shock. And interestingly, and now we're talking about back in 1984, 85, an interview carried out by our own Ambassador Kawar with Professor William Schwartz on terrorism. And all the questions asked were absolutely, the relevant questions of that time and of our time. The editor-in-chief of the newsletter was a young woman by the name of Luma Halazoun, who was also a student at SOM, the management school, and is now the wife of Ambassador And so, as I was just telling the ambassador, I thought of myself and continue to think of myself after he left the campus, and I learned that they had married as the matchmaker, primary function as the faculty advisor to the club. Now, Karim Kawar went on, as I've learned, only a month after he finished Boston College in 1987, he established a first of a series of companies that he was able to organize, and this covers a very wide range of businesses. Most of them have to do with technology and promotion of technology. He has been a leader in not only in Jordan but in the greater area of the Middle East. He has been the chair of an Information Technology Association of Jordan, and I could go on and on. Take my word for it, it's an extremely imaginative, entrepreneurial, and an extremely distinguished career as a business leader dealing with cutting-edge technologies in Jordan and in the Middle East. So what I want to say is that in the years that you have been away, we too have had a few accomplishments in the area of Middle Eastern studies. We now have a vibrant program in Middle Eastern studies. As I mentioned to you, we have something like 85 students who are enrolled in various Arabic courses. We have an introduction to Islamic civilization, and of course we have refurbished Fulton Hall, which I'm sure you have noticed and take some pleasure in. And I want to end by saying that I certainly realize how proud you must feel, Mr. Ambassador, representing the great nation of Jordan. We too share that sense of pride in seeing one of our own students ascend such heights in the world. And we thank you for coming here tonight and congratulate you and look forward to your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ben Azizi and Professor Sardella and all professors. I don't know for you, but I'm very intimidated to speak in front of my professors. Professor Peter Olivieri, and I don't have magic tricks to do, so I'm used to doing them. And I do not have any prepared remarks. So I'm just, because every time I write a speech, I have to edit it because things happen back home. I'm going to start sharing a video just to give you an idea about Jordan. just wanted to share that with you because we all have perceptions of different parts of the world, and hopefully this gave you a bit of the sights and sounds of Jordan. Jordan is a small country in the Middle East. King Abdullah says Jordan is caught between Iraq and the hard place. I'd expand to say that now it's hard places because you had the latest troubles in Lebanon as well. But I would like to today just talk briefly about a few issues. One about Jordan and what's happening in that country, but also how we view the development in the region, specifically in Iraq, but also on the peace process front. Jordan has a population of 5.5 million, half of whom are under the age of 18. So a very young population, and you've seen many of the faces in this video. This, of course, poses a tremendous challenge for a government that's trying to care for this young population. But also it presents a huge opportunity if we do it right. In Jordan, we have one of the highest literacy rates in the region of over 95%. Now English is taught starting from grade 1 in all public schools, and we hope that all Jordanians will be bilingual. Computer literacy is also taught starting from grade 1. We have undertaken what's called the Jordan Education Initiative, which is supported by companies such as Microsoft, Intel, Cisco, HP, and Computer Associates, among others, that tries to integrate technology into the curriculum. And 2 years after this program was initiated, now it's being replicated in the Palestinian territories in Egypt and in India. So hopefully Jordan, through the reforms that we are undertaking, can set examples for other countries in the region. Those reforms which have been accelerated starting back in 1999 when the late King Hussein passed on and his son, King Abdullah, ascended the throne. He looked at the situation in Jordan where the largest employer was the government. And he said, this is not sustainable. So we need, instead of the government creating jobs, we need the private sector to create jobs. So there has been a tremendous focus on the private sector. And he turned to the private sector and said, what is it that we can do to help you create those jobs? And the private sector in turn said, we need to have an open economy. And this has led the way for Jordan to join the World Trade Organization back in January of 2000. And it has led also to entering into the Free Trade Area Agreement with the United States. Jordan was the 4th country after Canada, Mexico, and Israel, and it was the first Arab country to enter into such an agreement. If we look at the results, our exports to the United States were at a mere $13 million in '98. That grew to over $1.1 billion last year. And it has created over 70,000 new jobs. Those jobs have gone primarily to women, to mothers and daughters. That has doubled and tripled the household income. It has raised the stature of women at home as wage earners. And it has had a profound impact on society. Now, those reforms that are taking place are not just on the economic side, but on all fronts. And this is when we talk about democracy today. Democracy means different things to different people. So when the president says democracy, someone who's living in the Middle East might hear that word and it might mean something else than the democracy that you experience here in the US. So our efforts in Jordan have been on building the pillars of democracy, and those are the rule of law, transparency, accountability, human rights, freedom of the press, the participation of women, having a representative society, having an independent judiciary. No one would disagree about the rule of law, and while others might disagree on what form democracy will take. And this is where our investment has gone, especially over the past 6 years. The results, as I have mentioned, we've had good economic growth that last year exceeded 7.5%, which is unprecedented in this day and time in our region. And it has had a very positive impact on the country as a whole. But of course, the development in Jordan would be hindered by the lack of development in the region, which holds us back. And in Jordan, we subscribe to the notion that if you raise the water in the harbor, then all boats will rise. That Jordan can only develop so far on its own, but if we can develop the whole region, then we can move forward. Now, the talk about democracy and reforms is not new, and it's not presented from the West or imposed on the East. This is where the Arab scholars in the Arab Human Development Report, which was a report presented in 2002, identified 4 deficiencies or deficits in the Arab world, primarily education, democracy, the participation of women, and economic opportunities. Jordan was the first country to endorse that report and to adopt its recommendations. And we have been in the process of implementing those. And we have come a long way as well. We look at another indicator, which is called the Global Competitiveness Ranking, which is an index that's developed jointly by the World Economic Forum and Harvard Business School. And they rank, this is a growing list of countries, but when they were ranking 75 countries in 2002, Jordan ranked number 44. In 1 year, we jumped to number 34. And then the ranking included 105 countries, and we were still ranked 35. And that has improved significantly, and we still look at that ranking and how we can improve forward. Now, I mentioned Iraq and the hard place. Iraq, of course, is a big concern, regardless of where people stood vis-a-vis the war. Today, there's a situation at hand that we need to help Iraq move forward. Jordan has taken the position that we cannot afford a failure in Iraq, and we have done everything we can to support the Iraqis in their struggle and in moving forward with their democracy. The elections that were held in January were successful, and that a larger turnout than what had initially been anticipated have taken the risk of casting their ballots. The results have not been much of a shock because the Iraqis have voted, and they have voted for the Islamic Alliance, which we fear is more leaning towards Tehran. This is a concern because the last thing that we want to have in Iraq is an Islamic Republic. This would not be a democracy because many of the Islamists in our region believe in a one-man, one vote, but they believe in having it one time. Once they are in power, they wouldn't want anyone else to participate, and this would be a limited participatory system. Now, Iraq, of course, has a long way to go, and this is why we believe you cannot have democracy overnight, and you have to invest in the structures of democracy, which have been non-existent in Iraq. So there's still a long way to go, and we don't believe there is a cookie-cutter approach that one democracy would work across the whole region, that every country has to evolve into its own form of democracy. The situation in Iraq requires to address security first and foremost. Without security and stability, little can be done on the other fronts. For this reason, Jordan has taken on the role of training Iraqi police. We are training 35,000 Iraqi police over 2 years. So far, over 12,000 have been trained and have gone back to Iraq. And hopefully more will follow and will contribute to bringing stability to the region. I will talk a bit about the peace process. There's more reason today to be hopeful about the peace process. The recent summit that was held at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, where by the invitation of President Hosni Mubarak and in the presence of His Majesty King Abdullah, the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and the Israeli Prime Minister Sharon have met, and that was a good first step. But we should be very careful about not raising our expectations too high. This is only the start, this is the beginning. And the situation there is very fragile, that it could crack by those who do not want to see peace happen. The largest part of the population, both on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, want to see a peaceful resolution to this problem. But there are, of course, minorities in every camp that want to disrupt peace, because they are the ones who thrive on chaos. The situation is improving. The release of the prisoners yesterday has been a good gesture on behalf of Israel. There are many more. Israel has released 500 prisoners. There are 400 more scheduled to be released. There are over 7,000 Palestinian prisoners that remain in Israeli prisons. Israel has to help the Palestinians feel a change before Abu Mazen and after Abu Mazen, that now with a new elected, democratically elected Palestinian president, that they can see change on the ground and change in their day-to-day lives. So Israel has to ease the hold on the Palestinian society by removing roadblocks, by lifting curfews, by allowing the freedom of travel of people and goods. And that will start to show that the Palestinians would have more to provide for than to fight for. I always tell my Israeli friends that we have to help the Palestinians to stop seeing it greener on the other side of the fence, that we need to give them something worth living for rather than dying for. And once the Palestinians see that they can invest in their economy and that their livelihoods start to improve, then this is a good chance for us to build on and to have peace, hopefully that would be a lasting peace, where a viable Palestinian state would also contribute to a secure Israel, where all countries would work to rebuild that region. We have seen the golden years following the Oslo Peace Accord that has attracted investments from all over the region that came into the Palestinian territories, where we saw tourism flourish, not just in Israel, but also in the West Bank and in Jordan and Egypt, and hopefully that would come again soon. In Lebanon, and the tragic assassination of former Prime Minister Hariri is a typical sign of the Middle East. Just when you think everything is going in the right direction, something has to happen that would disrupt that process. Of course, we would be concerned very much about what happens in Lebanon. We hope and pray that this will not be the cause of going back to the 70s, where we have seen a meltdown of the Lebanese society. But hopefully this would be a turning point and would be a positive momentum that would help drive the Syrians out of Lebanon and regain Lebanon's sovereignty to the Lebanese. But again, there are several factors, outside factors that affect what happens in those countries, whether it is in Lebanon or whether it is in Palestine. But we see here an opportunity, and frankly, with the second term for President Bush, we see the glass half full rather than half empty. We believe that this is an opportunity for President Bush to leave a legacy. 8 former American presidents were unable to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This would be an opportunity for the president, and we hope through his Secretary of State and through the allies in Europe, the quartet, which was brought about by the roadmap, that we can move forward, that the withdrawal from Gaza can be part of that roadmap. So all those positive moves that Israel is making can be part of a bigger plan that would result in a two-state solution, and Israel living securely by the Palestinian state that would be a viable state. I would like to end here and just thank you again for giving me this opportunity, and hopefully open the floor for questions and answers. Thank you.
your hand up. The only thing I would ask is if you do have a question and you get called, just stand up and project your voice so the rest of us can hear you.
Hi, I do have a question. A theme that came up repeatedly both in the video you showed and in the portion of your presentation that was about Jordan itself was the modernization or perhaps westernization of Jordan. Do you see that as maybe not entirely a positive thing? I mean, is there some, in a sense, perhaps a crisis of identity that might be developing? I mean, I'm sort of, I guess, concerned for Jordanian identity in itself. It's sort of becoming subsumed by, Visa cards flashing across the screen in a movie devoted to perhaps promoting Jordan as a place to visit. So just any thoughts or things you have on that nature?
I thought I edited the Pepsi can. Well, certainly there is an influence of American pop culture, not just on Jordan, but on the whole world. Frankly, in Jordan, we have been investing also in preserving our culture, and the cultural dimension of Jordan is a very rich one. It's very deep. It goes several centuries back. So and you have seen some of the heritage sites that we have in Jordan. Now, if you go, for example, to visit Amman, the capital, you will see a lot of architecture that you do not see in this part of the world. The materials that we use and the designs that we use are very different. Certainly, the younger generation tend to dress similarly, and they listen to the same music. My son, who's 13 years old, he instant messages his friends back in Jordan. They're keeping up with Boston College's basketball ranking, which makes me look good in Washington. So this is part of the global culture that we see. But frankly, it's you find that Jordanians are very much attached to their culture, to their language, and they do express it in their own way. So now they are using the same tools. So they use the same web development tools to produce websites, but you will see an American website and the Jordanian website, and you can tell that they are not the same, they're different. The focus, for example, on language, we want to teach our students English because we want them to be able to access information. We see the internet as the equalizer that allows everyone equal opportunity to knowledge and access to knowledge. And we don't want language to be a barrier. But certainly we have efforts underway also to maintain and to enrich our culture further. But you're right about the fear, and this is where it goes back to the family. What sort of family values do you invest in? And we are also, when we hear about principles and values, we think that those are only existent in the US and that nobody else has values. Frankly, you'll find that many of those values are common and they are shared, and they are more or less the same. And we find that there's much more that we agree on rather than we disagree. So, but it's a very good question.
Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned the importance of developing a secure environment in Iraq, and you also mentioned Jordan's efforts in training Iraqi police forces. And I was just wondering if you could sort of specifically outline what's being done with those, or what steps are being taken with the police forces to ensure that they don't return to Iraq and adopt the culture of corruption and nepotism that formerly characterized the Iraqi police force.
Thank you for that question. We do not participate in the selection process, for example, of who joins this training. We work with the interim Iraqi government. We receive those cadets that get trained, and frankly, even the training in Jordan is done by Iraqi trainers. So we've trained the trainers first, and then it's Iraqi instructors that provide this training to the Iraqi cadets. In Jordan, it's merely the safe haven where those cadets can be trained without being harassed or intimidated by the insurgencies that they have witnessed in Iraq. That's a very good question regarding fighting corruption. And frankly, when you have an absence of the institutions that are required, so for example, you have the police force, which is manning the streets, but then you need the prisons, you need the court system to ensure that there's due process, and that those who violate the law that you're upholding the law, versus just holding them, detaining them, and then that has led in many countries to corruption when the other structures are absent. But this is where Jordan cannot do it on its own, and this is where we're working with the international community to rebuild those structures in Iraq. So hopefully that will come. Corruption has not been the biggest problem today in Iraq, but it can certainly return to be that. And this is why I go back to focusing on the rule of law. Once you have modern laws that fight corruption, and that that you have a court system that can uphold the law through an independent judiciary, then those are the positive steps to rebuilding a modern society.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. I was wondering, in light of the recent upgrading of relations between Iran and Syria, what sorts of things Jordan was planning to do to meet those challenges presented by this alliance?
Well, this is what we fear about the alliance that's taking shape, that would extend also to include Hezbollah in Lebanon. And frankly, it's not a healthy alliance for the rest of us, because certainly we have seen those countries promote the culture of violence, and this is something that we want to end. So we hope that the other voices, and here we talk about the silent majority, when you look at terrorism in general, and those who support it, or those who carry out terrorist acts, they are a minute minority in the Muslim world at large, which is 1.3 billion people. So very few of those carry out such acts, but there's a large number of contributors and sympathizers and donors that unfortunately are driven by the absence of hope. So for example, when we look at the Arab world of 22 countries that are members of the Arab League, with a total population of 300 million people, today with the median age being less than 18, you have a very large population that's going to be joining the workforce. This population is going to double by the year 2020. In the next 15 years, the Arab world has to create 120 million new jobs to maintain unemployment at the level that it is, which is already very high in some countries. So this is a major challenge, and this is where we need to be able to counter that radical alliance that's taking place, that's pushing the Arab and Muslim world to a brink. And I was talking earlier about the struggle that we have today between radical Islam and moderate Islam. That today, this struggle against radical Islam requires and is based on moderate Islam being able to speak loudly and to be articulate in its positions, that like any other religion, Islam respects other religions, respects, actually Jordan is a good example of coexistence, where we have unfortunately a small minority of a Christian population of less than 5%, but you can see in Jordan coexistence and tolerance and a model society, frankly, that can be replicated elsewhere. But we worry about other countries' intolerance to other religions and other faiths.
Ambassador, you mentioned several positive steps that your country has taken in regards to women's situation in Jordan, and I was wondering how you would characterize Jordanian women's circumstances today, and also in light of the progress that Jordan has made in this area, have you observed that that positive success has affected or influenced any of the neighboring nations?
Well, we believe that women are the real bosses. And I can tell you from my humble experience. In Jordan, we've taken some big strides. What happens, frankly, is that there are social pressures more than anything else. For example, today in our universities, we have more female students than male students. But frankly, after they get their degrees, many opt to become professional mothers rather than seeking a professional career. So we have seen that trade-off. What the government has been doing, for example, in terms of our cabinet, today we have 4 women ministers, which is more than any country in the region, and frankly more than the United States. In our parliament, it's a bicameral parliament with the lower house that's elected and the upper house which is appointed, which is similar to the British model with the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Women have had the right to run and vote for decades, and we have had only one successful woman who was elected to our parliament. In our last elections, the government decided to introduce a quota. So now out of our 110 seats, what the government had hoped is to have 12. Unfortunately, it was cut by half. So we have 6 women in our house who, regardless of what votes they get against the men, the ones who get the highest votes within their districts automatically get those 6 seats. In our Senate, we have 7 out of 55. So we have a total of 13 out of 165 members of our parliament. But there are many ways to go, and I think today what we believe in first and foremost is education. If you have educated women, if you have educated mothers, then that would have the most profound impact on the family as a whole. And we can go a long way. We are sharing our experience with everyone in the region. So we hope that others can learn from us as we learn from others. For example, today in Morocco, Morocco has taken major strides in giving women more rights. For example, what we did in Jordan, for example, the government passed a law while our parliament was in recess that gave the women the right to divorce. When the parliament reconvened, 5 out of the 6 women in our house voted against that law, which gave them the right to divorce. So this is where, of course, there are tribal pressures on these women to vote one way or another. But this doesn't stop us from moving forward. The law, by the way, is still in force. Women can divorce if they want to, although we hope they don't. We very much focus on the family unit within our society, which we believe is very important, and divorce should be the last option. Well, at least women have the right should they want to exercise.
Mr. Ambassador, I was wondering how you view Mahmoud Abbas's reputation in Jordan, among the people of Jordan and the rest of the Arab world. There were some concerns when he first came to power that he might have been too friendly with Sharon compared to Yasser Arafat. How do you think the people reacted to his election?
Well, I don't think it is. I don't think Jordanians should have a say. Mahmoud Abbas is the Palestinian president. It's the Palestinians that have to voice their concerns. I think they have voted. They voted for him on a very clear platform that he was against violence. And I don't think if you know Abbas's positions over the past, I mean, he's not a hardliner by Palestinian standards, but he is certainly very much for Palestinian rights. He's not going to give in to what those rights are. I think we're yet to see him negotiate with the Israelis. I think we're still far from seeing those negotiations happen, especially on final status issues. At the end of the day, there has to be a fair resolution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I say Arab-Israeli because it's not just a Palestinian Israeli, but also it involves the Lebanese and Syrian tracks. And all those tracks have to be addressed as well. But today, Mahmoud Abbas believes that the recent intifada has been a major setback for the Palestinians in their strive to achieve their statehood. And they have lost more than they have gained. So, and as any leader that should work to protect the livelihood and saving the lives of his people rather than expending them. So I think in this respect, Abbas stands for the modern Palestinian leader that he is, that he does not change his position depending on who's speaking or who's voting. He has been consistent and he's been elected into office accordingly. And I frankly see him also taking positive moves forward without any conditionalities, which has been the trait in the past of many Palestinian leaders. So he's in the driver's seat, and I think he's forcing Sharon to react to his initiatives rather than the other way around. And by Israel reciprocating its goodwill, I think it's moving all in the right direction.
We have a question up in the back.
Ambassador, could you talk a little about the initiative that the kingdom is taking on attracting foreign direct investments?
Certainly. Jordan, of course, when we talked about the need to open the economy, we very much believe that Jordan has to attract foreign investment in order to create the growth in our economy that's required. It cannot grow just from within. So frankly, what we have undertaken is a series of privatization initiatives. So what used to be government-owned and run companies are being privatized. I'll share with you an example of the Jordan Telecommunications, Jordan Telecom, which is the national PTT that was privatized in the year 2000. Unfortunately, 40% of the shares were sold then to France Telecom. And what was worse than a public monopoly or a government-owned monopoly was a private-owned monopoly. But that sector has come a long way. For example, the wireless sector, now four operators have been licensed. At the time when competition was introduced, the market grew from 200,000 subscribers to over 1.2 million subscribers in less than 2 years, which was remarkable. So now we see competition in several sectors. We see sectors such as energy generation, transmission and distribution. It's also being privatized, water desalination, water conveyance. We see the sectors of transportation, the mining sector, all of those sectors being privatized, and that has attracted a lot of foreign investment. But what we focus on the most is that any investor, whether a national or foreign investor, should have a good return on investment. That's how we can attract additional investments. Otherwise, and sometimes in developing countries, what's exercised in a hit-and-run type of affair, you can get an investor once, but you can't get others to come.
Hi, Mr. Ambassador. I understood that the former King Hussein used to be more, he used to put more of his energy towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and his successor has, obviously, as you said, been more in the opening the economy for various reasons. But how is the Jordanian people now trying to integrate those Palestinian refugees? Because I've read in different sources that up to a quarter of your population is now Palestinian origin. So how do you want to integrate those immigrants or refugees so that extremism isn't bred in poverty or things like that?
King Abdullah has focused more on the economy, but it doesn't mean that he's focusing less on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. That remains to be one of our core issues as Jordan, because what happens between the Israelis and the Palestinians affects Jordan in many ways, politically, from a security perspective, but as well from a social perspective, because as you have mentioned, there are many Palestinians in Jordan, there are Palestinian refugees, and there are as much as 40%, some of whom, or the majority of whom, still live in refugee camps. But Jordan has granted those Palestinians Jordanian nationality. So they hold Jordanian passports, they participate in our elections, but many opt to stay in refugee camps because they retain their status as refugees, which entitles them to certain rights under international law. Now, there are also in Jordan Jordanians of Palestinian origin. And that's before there were borders. There was a free movement of people, and those are also a good number in Jordan. So there's a lot of pressure as well to address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And frankly, when it reaches high alert levels, it affects and it moves our society as well. And in the past 2 years, when the tension reached its highest level, there were calls by Jordanians to withdraw from the peace treaty that was signed between Jordan and Israel in '94. But frankly, of course, when Jordan commits to a peace treaty, we don't retract from it. Today, there is a problem with the refugee problems, and let me talk a bit about the right of return, which is a major issue. And this is what frankly scares Israel. That what do we do with all those Palestinians, millions of them, if they want to come back? What was presented in the Arab Summit in March of 2002 was called the Arab Peace Initiative, and it detailed what's known as the agreed solution to a refugee problem that offered the following. Those Palestinian refugees that live in Arab countries such as Jordan, but also in Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt, would become citizens of those countries. The country that has the biggest problem with this issue is Lebanon, because it would affect its demographics. But then a number of those refugees would return to what would become a Palestinian state, and that would be based on the 1967 borders. Other countries, such as Canada and Australia, have offered to receive Palestinian immigrants. And finally, there would be a small number of Palestinians who would return to today's Israel based on family reunification. And those would, again, have to be agreed to by Israel as well. Khalil Shiqaqi, who is a Palestinian pollster, conducted an opinion poll. And when he presented the Palestinian refugees with this issue, and he said those that would return to Israel would become Israeli citizens. They would not live in the houses their ancestors once owned, but in new housing. And their children would have to serve in the Israeli Defense Force. The absolute majority of those Palestinians said no thank you. So we think there is a solution to this problem. But frankly, you cannot take away, having the right of return is one thing, exercising it is another. But you cannot take away that right of return, which translates to the absolute majority by monetary compensation. That those people would be entitled to some financial compensation for what they have lost.
Thank you, Mr. Nasser. You spoke earlier about reform in the Middle East, saying that there is no cookie-cutter approach to democracy, and saying that countries in the Middle East might choose to evolve their own forms of democracy. How do you envision this democracy? Is it secular, is it not, or how is it different?
Well, we hope it will be secular. In Jordan, we very much believe in the separation of church and state. And we believe the laws should reflect that. There's a lot of discussion about Islamic law, which is the Sharia, that we believe that that law addresses many issues, but it doesn't address all issues. So for example, in Jordan, the Islamic law is one of the references, but not the only one. And we believe that every country should select its laws. What we have been working on is modernizing our laws. So, for example, Islamic Sharia does not address intellectual property rights, for example, and that's.
That's on my presentation. It's not that long.
Actually, there will be a reception afterwards for those of you who can be induced to stay.
There's food if you want to stay. All right, well, on behalf of the Middle Eastern Islamic Studies Program and the Student Association, we'd like to thank you again for coming back to your alma mater, BC, so we could give him a round of applause.